found teaching online a very different experience to teaching face-to-face. In an online environment, you are looking at a computer screen. So you can't see your students, you don't get that non-verbal feedback from your students, you can't see if they've fallen asleep, you don't even know if they're actually there. It's also very different for students. They can't see other students and they can't see you. When teaching online, we have to think about ways to make students feel comfortable. When I start my virtual classes, one of the things that I do is I have a getting started slide so that that's available as soon as the classroom opens. So students know that A, they're in the right place and they have instructions about what they need to do. I'll also send a chat message saying welcome to the class, and the class will be starting at the scheduled time. In the getting started, I might have on the slide some of the things that I would expect they would have done before the virtual class. And I put something to make them feel comfortable. Another thing that I might do in the getting started slide is have a question for them to think about. And so while waiting, consider da 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 da. And this will be something that we will then discuss in the virtual class. So they've had time to prepare, think about, and get ready for the discussion. The other thing I do in the introductory course is make sure students know different ways that they can participate. And then I provide opportunities throughout the virtual class for them to do this. One way is emoticon. And emoticon is a great icebreaker. So when I'm showing them how to use the emoticons, I might say, how do you feel about studying online? And they can use the emoticon to express their feelings. Then throughout the virtual class, I might ask them, was that clear? Or how are people feeling? And what did people think about that comment? It gives them an opportunity to quickly respond without having to write or speak. It just gives you feedback and you know what students are, how they're tracking through the session. Another method is using the polls. And with the polls, there's different varieties that you can use. So you might use a yes/no poll, or you might choose multiple choice. So for example, in the beginning course, I might say to them, have you studied online before? And they can respond yes, no, and then you can publish the poll results up on the screen. Another way is I might ask them, what age cohort are they working with? And that gives you an idea and gives other students an idea of who's in the course with them. Again, throughout, I will plan at different sessions to use the poll for different purposes. And I think it's important to think carefully about how you want to use the poll, how that is going to facilitate participation, and what information you're looking for when you use the poll. Students get tired if you just constantly use polls or quizzes without any purpose. Another way is for students to make comments using the microphone. So I'll go through and ask students how many students have got the microphone, and again that's a good way to use the poll, and they can say yes, no, or they can put up their hand if they've got the microphone. So I'll show them that if we're using a microphone, or if they'd like to use the microphone, they put up their hand first, and then I will ask them by name to turn on their microphone, and then they can comment. The other way for making a comment or asking questions is using the chat box. And a lot of students are familiar with the chat box. It's not dissimilar to any messaging system, and they feel quite comfortable with this. I've found that students probably tend to use the chat box more than they use the microphone. And although for me, I would prefer them to use the microphone to hear their voice and get a response, I have to appreciate and respect that some students feel a lot more comfortable using the chat box. What the chat box does is it allows for you to look at more in-depth discussions, so you can get them to make comments, share their experiences, and talk about issues that they may have come across. And these are functions that aren't so applicable with the emoticon or polling. So the talking and the chat box allows for more in-depth participation. One of the things that I've learnt with the chat box is that when you're allowing time for the students to respond using the chat box, for those listening on the recording, it might be a blank space of time. So what I now do is say, I notice that some of the students are using the chat box. I'm just going to give you time to respond. If you're at home, if you're listening to the recording, you might like to think about this. What are your thoughts about this topic? And so that fills in that blank pause on the recording. The other thing that we use in virtual classes are the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are a great opportunity for students to get together in small groups and to share and meet with each other. It does take a little bit of practice, and so initially students aren't necessarily so comfortable with it, and I find that if I go from room to room, I can facilitate the discussion or just check how they're going. And so this is another way where they can go work on an activity or work on a problem, and up here they were given myths that they had to discuss or debunk. And so in this they went as a group and thought about it, came up with solutions or rationale to support or dispute their thoughts, and then came back to the main room, and this one member from each group shared those experiences. So that was just another way that gives students the opportunity to participate in the virtual class. I think it's important when you're doing any of these activities is to make sure that you plan. So you plan what you are going to do, have a clear idea of why you are doing that and how that is going to benefit or facilitate learning. I'm still learning how to do this. It's still a new experience, and we're developing more and more ideas about how to go on and engage students. I think it's important to get their feedback about how they find the virtual class and what they like. And I wish you all the best with your online teaching.